Let's see here. Uh-oh. Okay, double checking. I'm wondering if this is going to be really delayed. Hey.
Sorry.
Okay, they might really be doing.
That's pretty good audience.
All right, testing one more time. I'm thinking that usually I love to have the Ethernet, but I couldn't seem to do that. I got it connected with the Wi-Fi, but of course in streaming, then it can be a little interesting. So I'm wondering if it's streaming okay, if we got the sound, we need to see if it's gonna work. And we're gonna be starting very soon. We're just trying to make sure and confirm some things online. So testing, let us know, how is the sound? How is it going? And if you happen to know me personally, you can text me and let me know what's going on too, if you're too shy to put it on the YouTube. So I'm gonna go check it again. Excuse me though.
Are you in here, John? Which John? You. I am.
Why is there another John in here?
I don't know.
And there's
He
John.
usually is.
I'm worried that it's not the best.
Yeah.
No, I know, but it looks, it's very glitchy. Okay. So I'm thinking, if I may ask, if you're able to put your phones on like airplane mode, sometimes the Wi-Fi, like for streaming purposes, it boosts the signal. So if you're able to do that, that would be awesome. Because I'm wondering, I know that happens at the library with the Wi-Fi, and the more devices that are doing that, then it's sometimes the trickiest there.
Got mine.
Okay.
How long until takeoff?
Okay.
I don't think she heard you.
That's a good cure. That's
What care are we?
I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes? About 3 years.
Let's,
I'm really thirsty. Alexis, here.
it's not. Well, I guess just
You need some here?
quickly.
I was just gonna let her use my water bottle if she wants.
There's a water fountain outside.
Your mom should go out there.
Well, can I go out there? Because there's a drinking fountain like.
Okay, very quickly.
Yeah. It's been kind of going on. People watch movies. Myself, since I turned 62, yeah. So that's
Okay.
back to Washington.
All right, so my guess is usually the sound is good and I'm not hearing, but I think they're getting a slow connection. Sometimes after the stream, I think hopefully it builds up again. Have you noticed that? I think if you've streamed before, have you streamed before on it and you've seen, no?
Not for a long time.
Okay,
I don't.
well, we might just go with it and hope and that the Wi-Fi will be better for us. But we're going to welcome you. So, hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Hedman. I am the director of Story Crossroads. So, we just celebrated our 98th house concert. So, today is the 99th house concert. So, we jump around and yay, woo, yeah. And we jump around. We've been as south as Payson and as north as Logan, Utah, but most of them are in the Salt Lake County or Davis County, Utah County area. But we jump around, and it could be indoor or outdoor, and sometimes if there's like a community, this still feels like a house concert. So I think we still can count as a house concert because we're going to be in this nice big family here, and it's a nice intimate setting to then delve into the oral art of storytelling. Now, of course, we're going to put things away because we're getting started, right? And we're going to focus on these stories. Now, Story Crossroads, we actually have year-round arts education for the arts. So if you go to storycrossroads.org, there are some free resources there. You have the storytelling basics in 8 hours, and you can go at your own pace, and it's just available. It's there. And we also are grateful for all of our funders. We have the Utah Division of Arts and Museums. We many times Utah Humanities, but if you probably noticed in the news, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and that means all 50 of the states with their humanities, they had their budgets cut, like their funding was gone. And so from our very first year, we've always had funding, but now it's different. But I want to still give credit because they've always funded us, and if they had the funds, they would still fund us. There's also the Salt Lake City Arts Council, who has funded us from the very beginning as well, and we are in Salt Lake City, so that's pretty exciting, right? And then we are in Salt Lake County. We also, one of our biggest funders is the Zoo Arts and Parks of Salt Lake County, or ZAP. And it was just recently renewed by everybody. Every 10 years, it's put out there of, do you support this? Yay! And it overwhelmingly every time has been supported, which we appreciate. And so we're one of many organizations that are helped with this so we can get more art out there. Now, the house concerts, you can come whether or not you donate. And if you donate, you're going to storycrossroads.org/donate. And that way it actually not only helps Story Crossroads, we also give it to our story artist, which today would be Kira. So she is amazing. She has been telling stories for, decades now, Kira?
Probably about 16, 17
16,
years.
so I just rounded up. Almost, decades, like almost 2 decades worth. And she not only does storytelling, she's done other arts and about. So you might have seen her do her balloon animal. I know that she's not doing balloon animals today, but she's known for many things that she can do, as well as her original works. And these are fairy tales retold. So they may sound familiar, but the way that she tells them, they are all new. So let us welcome to the stage, Kira Larkin.
Question, Kira,
Yes.
question. Can we donate cash? I don't know how you're getting funding for all this that you spent and everything. I figured I'd say something.
Oh, I'm gonna go ahead.
So yes, we accept all kinds of donations, and so we just have that. So afterwards, don't worry about it now, but afterwards they're cash, check, and then we even have QR codes that can be scanned and done that way too. Thank you for doing that. And if you're streaming, you'll see that there is a QR code. You can scan that and you can donate as well, and we'll make sure that money goes to Kira. So thank you.
All right, I'm gonna have to ask you to excuse me. I normally we stand, but I'm unable to stand for the hour, so I'll be sitting. The first story I'm going to tell is my version of Beauty and the Beast. I came up with this story when I was at a house concert down in Draper, and we were in the backyard, and I thought, what if I was at a small gathering or a larger gathering of people and a beast roared, what would I do? So this is that story. When I was a young lady of the age to be looking for somebody to marry, I was invited to a house in our community by another young lady. It was a party for couples and for individuals, and possibly a chance for me to find a husband. although my family was not the richest in town, we were quite well off, and we had a big house and a quite big piece of land. But this young lady's house was large, probably about 3 times the size of my house, and the yard was much, much bigger. She had a wonderful garden in the back, and while I was sitting at one of the tables listening to the string quartet she had hired, or her parents had hired for us to listen to, and finishing off a tasty morsel of food, there came from over the back wall a roar. And suddenly men were on their feet. Men came out from the corners of the gardens where they had disappeared with their young ladies, saying things like, "Where's my sword? I know it was around here somewhere. Where's my knife? I know I left it." And then the young ladies, "Save us! The beast is going to eat us!" Another young lady said, "Oh, I'm so scared. I might die tonight." I quietly stood up and I said, "The beast can't get us. We're in a yard. And we have to be in the forest for the beast to get us." And suddenly, sheepishly, they all said, "Oh, she's right. Yes, she is. Let's go back to that corner where we were, sweetheart," and other such things. Meanwhile, I made my way to the back corner of the garden where the beast's voice had come from, the roar had come from, and hoisted myself up on the top of the wall and looked out into the forest, and suddenly a voice said to me, "You want to meet the beast?" I said, "Yes, I do." "Come to the forest tomorrow morning. Go to the big house in the forest." "All right, I will," I said, and then he was gone into the darkness. I let myself down from the wall into the garden and found myself a nice soft bed of grass under some overhanging branches and curled up and fell asleep, as was common among the group of people I was with. The next morning when I awoke, I went into the necessaries that had been provided and cleaned myself up a bit, washed my face, fixed my hair and my dress, and then went out and enjoyed one of the pastries and some tea that we had been given by our hostess. Unable to find her, I left through the gate and shut it firmly behind me. I walked into the forest and stopped outside the gate of a very, very, very large house on a huge piece of property, much bigger than the house and property I had just left, and remembered when I was a little girl of maybe 4 or 5, how my father had brought me there, and we had stood outside the gate, and he had said, "A beast lives in that house." "A beast?" I asked. "Yes, a beast that changes from man to beast and hunts the forests at night. You must never come into the forest at night." I had gazed at the house, and then I'd said, "I'll free that beast from whatever curse holds him." And my father, setting me down, had hugged me and said, "I know you will, but be safe, my child." Now I let myself through the gate and walked to the front door and knocked. The door was opened by a short, round woman who I found out was the housekeeper. "Oh, you've arrived. Please come in. Liam is looking very much forward to meeting with you. Come, and I'll show you where you can meet with him." And she walked me into a room where there was a table set for 2 with dishes of food from which emanated wonderful smells. I seated myself and she left, and a minute later, a gorgeous, handsome man walked in. And he looked at me and said, "I am Liam." And I rose and said, "I'm Maureen." And he took my hand in his and said, "It's wonderful to meet you, Maureen. Come, let's eat." And we sat across from each other, and he told me about how he had become a beast at night. Many years ago, I fell in love with a young lady who I found out was a witch. And she asked me to marry her. Not wanting to bring that magic into my family, I said no. "A witch?" I said. "You mean like a healer? Healers are good." "No, not a healer. A witch that but worked in dark magic." And I refused, and she cursed me and said, "From now on, you're going to be a beast at night. You will bring me all little animals that you find. Cats, dogs, rabbits, birds, bats, squirrels, chipmunks, mice, and any insects you find, and you will most definitely bring me humans. who I will turn into beasts to use in my spells. I wiped my mouth delicately and said, you didn't bring her humans, did you? And he said, no, I didn't. Never. I found humans in the forest at night, but I'd pick them up and carry them to a trail and say, head that way, and you'll get to a road, and you'll be safe. I couldn't find anybody on a road, even if it went through a forest. Oh, I said. We had both finished eating, and he led me from the room, and we went and walked around his gardens. And he continued, so my parents, they passed away, and now it's me and the housekeeper and the cook and the gardener and a couple other servants, and here we are in this house. I said, well, what would one do if they wanted to free you from this curse? He said, you'd have to be brave and you'd have to go out at night, and the witch would most definitely hunt you. And it would have to be tonight, because if you waited another day, she would find a way to call you from this house. And she would probably use you in one of her spells. We sat on one of the benches and talked about our families, and then Liam said, do you want to stay? Do you want to leave? I said, I will stay, and I will go out tonight, and I will free you. He led me back into the house and saying, I need to turn you over to housekeeper, and she will take care of you until this evening. The housekeeper led me to a room where I was able to get some sleep, and that night I bathed in wonderful water with a very nice scented soap, and then I dressed in clothes pants and a top and a jacket that clung closely to my body. And she gave me shoes, which I found out that night were wonderful because they bit the ground and helped me to stay upright, and they bit into other things and helped me to stay safe as I undid that curse. Then she led me back to the same room where Liam and I had eaten that morning, and we ate a dinner together, and then Liam walked me to the door. I turned to him. I hope I will see you in the morning, I said. I hope so too. He drew me close and kissed me and then sent me out the door, and I went to the gate, and I looked left, and I looked right, and I wondered, which way should I go? And then, like a pointing finger, a moonbeam of light pointed to the right. And from somewhere distant came a voice singing, come, little sister, run down the trail, follow the moonlight, silver and pale. Listen to the moon, 'cause she don't know where it is you need, what it is you need, and where you have to go. So I turned right and I started running. I came to a pit so quickly that I had to windmill my arms to keep from falling into it. In the pit were dark, moving tendrils of mist that reached up and tried to grab my ankles. I took a couple of steps back and looked around. How was I going to cross this pit? Well, next to me was a huge tree, so big around that it would have taken about 4 or 5 of me to go around it. And I looked up, and there was a branch that could have gone over the pit. And I put my arms as far around the tree as I could, and I said, Mr. Tree, please help me. I need to cross this pit in safety. And there's no other way across. Could you drop your branch so I could cross it? Well, I could, but I am so tired and so thirsty. Please, I need water. If I don't get any water, I think I'll crumble to the earth. Please, water. And I looked around. I didn't see any water anywhere. I turned and looked behind him and off to the right, and there was a knee-high wall of stone, a circular wall that could be a well. I walked over and I looked down, and sure enough, it was a well. I could smell the sweetness off the water, and I dropped the bucket in, pulled it up, and then I took off my jacket because there was no way to release the bucket, and I doused my jacket in the water and then walked back to the tree and wrapped my jacket around its roots. And the jacket became loamy green grass and earth, and the trees sighed with pleasure. Oh, that feels so good. Thank you. Now I can help you. And he lowered his branch across the pit, and I scrambled up his trunk as he said, hurry, hurry, or the witch will get you. And then I started running down his branch as fast as I could. And as I ran, the tendrils reached up. The tendrils of mist tried to wrap around my ankles, but they couldn't. It was like the tree grew little walls up around my feet so I could get across safely. And I jumped off and turned and waved and said, thank you. And as I turned back, I saw off to my right, in a little clearing, a lady dressed all in silver, wearing a silver robe, and she was playing a harp. She turned and smiled at me and waved, and then I was off again, running until I reached a stream. Now the stream had 2 pathways made out of stone across it. There was a pathway on the right of dark, dark stone, and a pathway on the left of the silver stone. And there were tendrils in the water moving like snakes. And I looked from right to left and wondered, which way should I go, which path? I looked to the right and saw the dark path and thought, well, I could do the dark path, and it showed me gold and silver and treasures beyond anything I could imagine. And it showed me fame and fortune. And then I looked to the left, and the left showed me family and children and Liam. I stepped tentatively onto the right path, and it was like my foot sank into quicksand or sludge. And with an effort, I pulled my foot free. I wasn't going to take that path, so I stepped over onto the left path, and I began to walk across, and the tendrils tried to wrap around my ankles, but it was like they couldn't touch that silver path. They couldn't touch that rock. And then I was on the other side, and I was running again. And from far behind me came a chilling owl hoot and voice. Who dares to break my curse? Who am I going to catch? And I kept running, and suddenly I was in a giant field with a path on the right, a path straight ahead, and a path on the left. And in the middle of the field was a rabbit, just sitting there. And I ran and dropped down next to the rabbit. And I said to him, I need help. There's a witch after me, and I need help. Which pathway should I take? Sounding indifferent, he said, take whichever path you want to take. Doesn't matter to me. And I looked at him and I said, you don't understand. There is a witch coming after me, and she will turn me into some small animal, and she'll capture you, and we'll both go either into her stew pot or into a cage in her cottage. Which path should I take? Again, he looked at me and said, what witch? I don't know any witch. And that's when the owl's voice came again, closer this time. Who am I going to catch to put into my pot? And I said, that's the witch. And I picked him up and I said, do you hear what I'm saying? And I shook him. I said, she's going to catch us. And if she catches you, she will hunt your family. Now, which path should I take? Suddenly, looking a bit scared, the rabbit said, take the middle path. The middle path, I asked. Suddenly he said, no, the right path. I said, are you sure? The right path? And he nodded and said, yes, take the right path. And I had him in my arms and I ran for the right path. And as I entered the right path, I heard the owl's wings as they hit the open air over the field. And again, that voice came to me across thousands of miles singing, run, little sister, run from the owl. She is bound to make things foul. One touch of her claws and you're done. Run, little sister, run. And I ran. And suddenly I squatted and I let the rabbit off into the brush on my left that went into all kinds of bushes. I said, you'll be safe? Yes, I'll be safe. I said, you'll find your family? Yes, I'll find my family. Now you need to run. Run from that witch. And I stood and I ran, but the owl was close behind, and I needed a safe place I could go and I could stay. And suddenly I dropped to my knees and I rolled because the owl was right behind me. And I was in a little cave made by overhanging branches that touched the ground. I was in a place where the owl could not reach me, and I would be safe here. I could sleep here, I could spend the night, and in the morning I could go home. And then came the thought, but you'll never see Liam again. You'll never find the person you're supposed to marry. So I had to think of something fast, something to delay the owl or hurt the owl or something. So I felt around on the ground and I found something, but it was not what I needed. I studied it in the little bit of moonlight that filtered through the branches. It was a tiny charm in the shape of a shoe. Where did this come from, I wondered. I put it in my pocket, in the pants, and felt around again. And this time I found it was a piano, intricately made and delicate. Excuse me. And then, that wasn't what I needed. I put that in my pocket, and then I felt around for a third time, and this time I found a tiny deer-shaped charm. I put that in my pocket. These weren't going to help me. What could I use? I felt around a fourth time, reaching my arms as far as they would go, and found a large branch. Yes, I thought, this is what I can use. With one fluid moment, I rolled out and stood. And as I took my step, I heard the sound of the owl's claws rasping on the tree across from me. I turned as she began, hoo, hoo. I swung the branch with all my might and heard the owl as her body fell behind me. I tossed the branch aside and began to run again until a clearing opened up on my right side. And I turned and looked in, and there were shelves with all kinds of little charms on them. And a lady stood looking out at me and beckoned me to come in. And I went in, and she said, you must pick 5 of these charms to help you. Let the moonlight guide you, but only 5. If you don't pick what the moonlight shows you, you will not make it. As she turned to leave, I said, wait. And I pulled out the 3 that I had found, and I held them out to her and said, I found these in a little cave under the trees. I don't know how they got there. She took them from me and smiled. Thank you. And then she was gone. And I looked around. I looked at all the different charms, and suddenly the moonlight touched a shelf that had all kinds of things that a cat would like. Oh, there were balls of yarn and mice and fish, and I saw the moonlight touch a fish. And I took the fish and put that in my pocket. And then I looked at another shelf, and this shelf had things that dogs would like, balls and bones and other things. And I took a bone that looked like it would be big and meaty if it were real, and I put that in my pocket. And then I looked around again, and there was a shelf full of all kinds of musical instruments, pianos and guitars and harps and flutes, but that wasn't it. And then the moonlight touched a shelf above, and the one above, it touched a little bottle about that big. And I picked up the bottle and I looked at it and I said, what in the world? And then I said, well, this looks like, what is it? It said, world's best tomato juice. Well, the moon had shown it to me, so I might as well take it. Dropped that in my pocket. And then I looked around again and saw the moonlight touching a shelf full of insects, crickets, grasshoppers, butterflies, but the moonlight touched one that was like a big fly. And so I took that one, and then I looked around again, and the moonlight led me to a shelf full of things that cause light, lamps and matches and candlesticks, but then the moonlight touched one that was a lightning bolt. Okay, so I put that in my pocket, and then I walked back out to the path, and the clearing seemed to close behind me. And I turned right the way I'd been going, and I ran again, and suddenly I came into a large clearing that had 7 doors, 3 on my right, 3 on my left, and 1 straight ahead. Which door should I pick, I wondered. they all seemed to be calling to me. So I walked to my left and I opened the door and out jumped a large man dog. Oh, she sent me something to eat. Come. I said, no, wait. And I pulled the bone out of my pocket and I threw it to him. I said, here. And it grew that big. And it was full of juicy meat. And he said, this is wonderful. Thank you. And then he went back behind the door and the door closed and there was nothing there. All right, I thought I'll pick the first one on my right. So I picked the first one on my right. And out came a cat. A big black cat with gold through its fur and a white stripe down from its chin down to its chest. Oh, she sent me something good to play with. Come in and let's play cat and mouse. I said, no. I said, wait. And I threw the fish to it. Oh, this is wonderful. The fish grew as big as the bone. And she took the fish and she was gone. Okay, I thought, something's got to be right. So I went to the one now, the first one on the left, and I opened it. And out came a spider, 7 feet tall, horrible. Oh, she sent me something to play with, something to eat. I said, wait, no, and I threw the fly at it, and it grew ginormous, huge. And the spider caught the thing in its 2 front legs and its teeth and said, this is even better, thank you. And then she was gone. Okay, 4 doors left. I went to the first one now on my right and opened it, and out came a vampire. White shirt, black cloak, black pants, and long fangs. Oh, she sent me something to play with. Well, come in and let me have some blood. I handed him the bottle, which grew from that big to that tall from the ground. He took the bottle and looked in and said, world's best tomato juice. I love tomato juice. I don't even like blood. Thank you. And he disappeared. Well, now there were 3 doors, one in the middle and one on each side. Okay, I thought, there's got to be one that's right. So I walked to the one on the right. And when I opened it, blackness came out to encircle me. I took the lightning bolt and threw it into the blackness. And suddenly the darkness was gone. There were just 2 doors left, one on the left and one on the right, straight ahead of me. And from the left one flowed gold light, promising riches and money and fame and fortune. And the one on the right promised family and love. I must have forgotten what happened at the stream because I turned to look at the left one, and suddenly, without anything holding me back, I began to walk towards it. No, I thought, no. And out loud I said, no, I don't want to go there. And I was at the door when I jerked myself and turned towards the right door. And then something, an invisible cord, bound me from ankle to shoulder, bound my hands to my sides and bound my legs together. And I took tiny step after tiny step and suddenly reached that silver door. And I reached my hand up as slowly as I could, pulled on the handle with my fingertips. And suddenly I was falling forward through light and dark and music and children laughing. And then all went dark. I opened my eyes and found myself in the same bed I had slept in the previous day. And next to me sat the housekeeper. Oh, you're awake. We're so glad that you're back. Oh, Liam is so pleased. I looked at her and said, he's all right. And she said, yes, he's all right. It was before the sun rose that he changed from beast to man and knew that the curse had been broken. And you're safe, and he's going to be so pleased to see you. She led me to a full bath, and I bathed and put on clean clothes, and then went to eat breakfast with him. After breakfast, we went to see my parents, because one night away with my age group was not unheard of, but 2 nights away, my parents would start to wonder. And when I brought Liam home and introduced him to my parents, they absolutely loved him. Within 3 months, we were married, and I was living in that huge house. And Liam and I raised our children to be friends with the children of our servants, although we didn't call them servants. They were our friends. I helped in the kitchen. I helped the housekeeper clean. Liam helped the gardener, although against their wishes. They told us, "This is our work. You stay inside and enjoy yourselves." But we taught our children to play with their children and to be kind to all we met. As for the witch, when the curse was broken, Liam and I went to see her cottage that morning after we went back to my parents, and it had crumbled into a pile of rubble with the cages all bent and the animals freed. And at the door grew the biggest rose bush that anybody had ever seen, with roses that big around, the reddest roses. But that's another story for another time. All right, this next story is my version of Rapunzel. It's not quite the one that we're used to, but I will tell it to you. You may remember that at the end of Liam and Maureen's night, where Maureen saved Liam from being the beast, that there was a rose bush that grew up at the door of the witch's cottage. The biggest rose bush that anybody had ever seen, with the biggest, reddest roses. Well, this is probably 5 generations later, and the forest has now been cut down and turned into neighborhoods for people to live in. A couple by the names of Madeline and Arthur, with their young daughter Olivia, who was 3, moved in at the end of May into one of these houses. The only thing that bothered them was that in the yard grew a huge rose bush with the biggest, reddest roses that had ever been seen. And it was a couple of days after they moved in, probably a week. It had become June, and they let Olivia go out with her new little kitten to play in the yard. And at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Olivia's mother went to the door and called Olivia, but Olivia did not come. Her and Arthur searched the yard. They could not find Olivia. What they did find was the kitten sitting by the side of the rose bush in their front yard. And on one of the lowest roses was a piece from Olivia's pants, as well as one of her shoes under that branch. The kitten mewed and batted at the branch from the rose bush, being careful not to prick his tender paws on those very long, sharp thorns that were probably a good inch long. I myself, my name is Celeste, and I am the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Maureen and Liam. And I now live in a cottage in back of the big house where they lived. Most of the land has been sold and turned into neighborhoods, but the big house has now been turned into a museum. My parents moved away, and I decided to turn the house into a museum and tell the story of the area where we lived. And I was the curator of that museum, and I was sitting in my office the next morning after Olivia disappeared when the parents came in. And they asked me if I knew anything about that rose bush. I asked them why, and the mother said, "Well, our young daughter, we let her go outside and play last night with her cat, and she disappeared. But we found a piece of her pants on the lowest branch of the rose bush on the side that the front door looks out on, and her shoe under that branch, and the kitten sitting there, batting at the branch and mewing." And I looked at them and said, "Well, if your daughter disappeared, surely you called the police." And they both nodded, and the father said, "Yes, we called them, but they couldn't find our daughter either. And we think that because your great-great-great-great-grandmother stopped the curse on Liam, that maybe you know something about this rose bush." Well, I told them the story of Maureen and Liam and showed them the artifacts and the things I had about them. And then, even though I had much to do, I had exhibits to set up and paperwork to fill out and grants to write, I walked with them back to their house and looked, and the kitten was laying right by that side of the rose bush, mewing when he saw us. I looked at the rose bush. I walked around it a couple of times, and from somewhere I thought I heard a laugh, but I wasn't sure. And then whatever I'd heard was gone. And I said to Madeline and Arthur, I don't know where your daughter could be, but let me think about it. Okay, said Madeline, thank you. And Arthur thanked me, and I went back to the museum. It was, probably every couple of days I would go to their house, have lunch with them or dinner. I'd walk around the rose bush. I'd look at things, and I could not figure out what about the rose bush had changed. It almost looked as if the rose bush had grown from about 5 feet around to about 8 feet around. Not 8 feet, but more than 8 feet. And I went back one day to have dinner with them, and Arthur had bandages wrapped around his hands and his lower arms, and I asked him what was wrong. He said, well, I tried to use some cutters to trim back that rose bush because it seems like it's growing, but the branches attacked me. They wrapped around my arms, they wrapped around my hands, and dug their thorns into me, and it hurt. I said, have you had a doctor look at that? And he said, yes, I went to the hospital, and they took out the thorns and pulled away the branches and put some medicine on and gave me some antibiotics. I said, let me go out and look at that rose bush again. And this time when I walked around the rose bush, the kitten followed me, mewing. I picked him up and said, your mistress is in there, isn't she? And he mewed. And as I walked around the second time, I looked up to my left. The house was on my right, and I looked up to my left, and was that a window I saw? And looking out the window was a little girl. And I thought I heard a voice saying, help me, please help me. I don't like it in here. And then I saw a shadowy shape from behind her pull her back and close the curtains. And then whatever I'd seen was gone, covered by the branches from the rose bush. I looked at the kitten and said, was that your mistress? He mewed again. I'll do what I can to save her, I told him. And I set him down. And instead of following me inside to have supper with his mistress's parents, he stayed outside by that rose bush. And that night, as I lay in bed, I wondered if I had really seen that child and whoever had taken her. But something came to me and said, yes, that I had. Well, June turned into July, turned into August, turned into September, and there was no sign of Olivia. It was the end of September, and I got the notion to take an axe, which was much longer than the clippers that Arthur had used, and go to that rose bush and try to cut some of those branches back. So I took the axe and I went back to their house. They were gone for the day in some other city. And I started chopping at the branches as hard as I could that were on the side where the kitten was still laying. And the kitten, who is now he was probably about 8 months old. He had grown quite a bit, moved out of the way as the first branch fell. And then I cut back the second branch. And then I cut more. And suddenly in front of me opened a doorway. It was a doorway. And I looked through, and inside was a spiral staircase that spiraled up to the top of this rose bush that had once been probably about 6 feet tall and was now about 10 feet tall, or more, maybe 15 feet tall. It had definitely grown. He brushed past my ankles, and I reached down and picked him up and said, let's go, we're gonna find your mistress. And I went up those stairs as fast as I could and walked into a room that had no door on it. It had a doorway, but no door. And on the bed sat the little girl that I had seen through the window. And she looked up and said, "Are you here to save me? Please save me." I said, "Yes, I'm here to save you." And I walked over, set the cat down. He nuzzled her for a minute, and then I picked her up and said, "Come on." And the cat followed us as I raced down the stairs. Suddenly, the little girl was ripped from my arms, and I went tumbling down those stairs, down onto the grass on the floor inside that rose bush. And a very nasty voice said to me, "You have interrupted my work. Now I will let the ground take you." And suddenly I was going down under the ground, and I was laying, and I pulled my arm and tucked my hands into my pockets to try to keep them free. And I heard her saying while I was doing that, "The grass roots will wrap around you, and when my work is done, you shall become nothing but bones." And that was it. I was under the ground. If you don't know anything about grass roots intertwine with each other and gain strength from each other. That's why it's so hard to pull up grass, by the roots. And those grass roots wrapped around my arms, my head, my shoulders, bound my arms to my body, bound my feet. I was completely unable to move except for my hands, which were in my pockets, and I could barely move them because my arms were bound to my sides. I heard the kitten mewing. "As for you, kitty, back out you go." And she tossed the cat out the door, I was sure. Later, I heard Arthur speaking as if from a distance. "Well, I just went to the museum, but nobody's seen her." "You couldn't find her?" asked Madeline. "No, she's disappeared." "What's this axe doing here?" I had planted the axe blade side up in the earth in the ground outside the rose bush, and he looked and said, "I don't know, those branches seem shorter than the other ones." "Yes, they do," said Madeline. And the cat started mewing. I heard the little girl crying later after the witch, for that's who it was, had spanked her for something. And I knew that I had to get out of here or I would be caught. It was sometime later that a lady in silver appeared to me and said, "You need to understand that you need to free yourself, because if you don't, that little girl will disappear forever. But know that the moon can not help you for the 1 minute after midnight on Halloween evening. So free yourself." And then she was gone, and I wondered if it was the moon that Maureen had seen, or if it was Maureen appearing to me as the moon, or as the moon lady. Well, I wiggled my right hand fingers. I often kept a little foldable pair of scissors in my pocket for doing exhibits, and I found that pair of scissors, and wiggling my fingers, I unfolded it, and then, not caring if I damaged the outside pocket of the outward side of the pocket of my pants, I began to cut. Little by little, I cut, and I cut. And as the time passed, I would sleep sometimes, and I would cut sometimes, and I would hear Madeline and Arthur discussing me, wondering where I'd gone off to. And then all was free except for my ankles. Even my head was free. I had cut all the little grass roots. And I don't know if the witch didn't notice that the grass was going brown, but maybe she attributed it to the fact that it was fall and all the grass was growing brown. I don't know if she knew that I was working myself free. Maybe she did, and she thought I wouldn't do it in time. And as I wiggled myself around to free my ankles, I felt the kitten's paws digging up the grass. "Mew," said the kitten, "mew." And upstairs, I heard the witch saying, "Now let's get you dressed. I'll take you out at midnight, just before, and I'll offer you to him, and you'll become a witch like me." "I don't want to be a witch," the little girl began to cry. "I don't want to be with you. I want to go home." You're not going home. Now get dressed. And of course, I'm sure the little girl got dressed. Well, I freed myself and exited my prison and walked out of the rose bush without getting caught on the thorns at about 11:45 p.m. My watch still worked. Imagine that. And I walked over to the front steps of the house and I sat on the top of the steps. They had left a bowl of candy out and there were a couple of things left, and I opened one of the little candy bars and ate it. I had listened as the trick-or-treaters came to the house and got their candies, and well, now the kitten came over and joined me. I began to stroke him and said, "She's almost here. I will rescue her." And then at 5 minutes to midnight, the little girl came out with the witch. And the witch pushed her forward. "See the moon, how brightly it shines." At 11:59, the witch shoved the little girl forward. "Go, stand in that bright patch of moonlight." "No," said the little girl, "I don't want to." "Go, don't make me do it for you." And I leapt off of those steps and ran over and picked up the little girl and ran as fast as I could up the steps and in through the front door, slamming it behind me. The cat had enough time to get through. I don't know how he did it. But outside, the witch was yelling, "You took my sacrifice, you took my only way to live. Bring her back." And I shouted, "No, you can't have her." And then all outside was quiet. And Madeline and Arthur appeared at the top of the stairs. And suddenly they were crying, "Olivia! Olivia, where did you find her?" And Olivia, I had set her down and she was running up the stairs to her parents. And then Madeline said, "On that note, where have you been? You disappeared on us." And I said, "If I told you, I don't know if you would believe me." Well, we went into the kitchen and I had my first food in over a month. And I was still as good as I had been because trapped as I was still alive. It was only if the sacrifice had been made and I was still underground that I would have turned to bones. Well, we had grilled cheese sandwiches and hot chocolate, and I told them what I had done and what had happened to me. And Olivia told us about her time in that rose bush in the room up above. And we talked about what had happened outside. And I ran to the front window and looked out. The rose bush had come up, roots and all, and fallen across their yard. And it left in the hole in the ground. We looked the next morning. I spent the night with them, and we had pancakes and sausage the next morning. And then we went outside and we inspected. It left a large hole in the ground, which Madeline and Arthur turned into a pond. And the things that happened in that pond are another story for another time.
About 7 minutes.
Okay. And I apologize, this last story will not go with those first two. It might take a little long, so I apologize if I go over by a few minutes. This is the story of the 3 big pigs and the little pig. So there was once a family of pigs that lived together. The mother had 3 male sons and 1 daughter. The first of her children was Bambino, because, well, Bambino is baby in Italian. And by the way, this is the story of, well, it's not the Italian version, but it's one that happened in Italy. And her next son was Romeo, because, well, he was the love of her life when she had him. And then there was Antonio, just because she liked that name. And then there was Olive. And Olive was a dainty pig who helped the neighbors by babysitting and by shoveling their sidewalks when it was snowy, and by raking the leaves and earning money. And her 3 older brothers were, well, lazy. Bambino, even though he was the mother's baby, was huge. He loved to eat. Romeo liked to eat, but not as much as Bambino. And Antonio liked to eat, but not as much as his two older brothers. And finally, their mother called them together one day and said, "Children, I am so sorry, but it is time for you to leave. I cannot let you stay here any longer." Well, she didn't want to kick Olive out, but if she kicked the older three out, she had to kick Olive out. And she said, "Tomorrow morning you must leave. I will provide you each with 3 calzones, a container of spaghetti and meatballs, and a container of tiramisu." And that was that. So the next morning, Olive had packed all of her belongings and her money in a small bag, which she attached to her back, and then they left. Well, they went down the road a little ways, turned left, and walked not very far, and Bambino stopped and found a place on the side of the road and ate all of the food that his mother had given him. And then he went to sleep under a tree. It wasn't until the next morning that he decided he'd better build a house. And Romeo went a little farther than Bambino, and he stopped and he ate his 3 calzones and decided that the next day he'd better save his spaghetti and meatballs and tiramisu for the next day. And Antonio walked farther than Romeo, and he stopped and he only ate 2 of his calzones. Now, for those of you who don't know, a calzone it's an inside-out pizza with all the toppings in the middle, and then you dip it in some spaghetti sauce or some tomato sauce. And tiramisu is a dessert made of lady's fingers and coffee and some kind of pastry cream. It's supposed to be very good. I think it also has chocolate in it. So Olive, she walked the farthest of all. And she found a nice place and she ate 1 calzone and then set about trying to figure out how to make herself a house. They all slept under trees that night, and the next morning, it was a very nice summer day. The next morning, somehow the 3 brothers found themselves at the same dumpster for an Italian restaurant owned by a wolf named Giovanni. And they looked at what was in the dumpster, and Bambino, because he was very lazy, decided to build a house out of all the leftover bread. And he took the bread and he mashed up some of it and got some water from a deep mud puddle and made some paste out of it. And he glued the loaves and the breadsticks together and made himself a house. Not very big, but big enough to stay in. And then he went about looking for food. Romeo decided to take all the boxes from all the lasagna noodles and everything, and even the packing boxes. And he made himself a house out of all these boxes. And then Antonio decided to use the cans and the jars from the spaghetti sauce and the olives and everything else that they used, the mushrooms, and he somehow glued them all together and made himself a house. Not realizing that if something heavy, like the tree branch under which he built his house, fell on the house, it would break the glass, and that would be a very messy and painful situation. Olive, on the other hand, they were all way up the bank from a river. And Olive had taken some classes and knew how to make bricks. So she went to the local hardware store and bought herself a shovel, a spade, some mortar, and several brick molds. And then she went home and she went down to the river and found clay and mud and made a bunch of bricks, waited for them to dry, turned them out, did it again and again, and she built herself a brick house. She also got tiles from this hardware store and grout and put tiles down and made herself a bathroom and dug a well and had 2 bedrooms and a nice kitchen with a stove and counters, and she had tables and beds and couches and chairs, and because she had quite a bit of money that she had saved. Meanwhile, one day while she was down at the river digging for mud and clay, Giovanni saw her, And he thought, oh, there's a nice pig. I can get that pig. And he had seen the other pigs, and he thought, spaghetti, lasagna, fettuccine, ravioli, tortellini, ketchup, pig, and I can make the best sausage you ever tasted. Well, he came down all this grass, this huge field in the bank, towards Olive. Olive saw him coming, and she went down in one of the holes she had dug and covered herself with clay and mud. And then she came up screaming and yelling the most hideous sound that you've ever heard. And Giovanni saw this creature coming at him and lost all of his nerve and forgot about the pig and turned tail and ran. And Olive went back into the water and she cleaned herself off, and then she continued making bricks for her house. Well, by that fall, her house was done. And on a day when there was a huge rainstorm, well, Bambino's house went absolutely soggy and fell in around him. And he decided that he'd better go see Olive. And as he was passing Romeo's house that had gotten pelted with rain, became very soggy, and it fell down, with Romeo barely being able to he got out. He had a lot of soggy stuff on his back, but he got it off. So the two of them continued on, thinking they'd better go see Olive. And as they came to Antonio's house, they found Antonio standing over his wrecked house. The branch that had been in the tree, it was rather dead, and it had fallen on his house and broken all the glass jars that he had used, or most of the glass jars he had used, and making a very big mess. And he was sobbing, "My house, oh my house, it's destroyed." And they said, "Come with us to Olive's house. We're going to go to Olive's." Olive had made a very nice lasagna and was just taking it out of the oven when a banging came at her door. And her brothers yelling, "Olive, we need help, please help us." And she went and opened the door and said, "What can I do for you, brothers?" Very kind. And they said, "Our houses are all destroyed. The rain has destroyed our houses. Help us." And she said, "All right, you may stay in my room until spring. And when spring comes, I will teach you how to build a house, but you all have to share the one guest bedroom." And they all crowded into her house and were joyful, and they saw that she had made lasagna, and they said, "Oh, feed us, feed us." And she said, "I will. In a minute, you need to wait because I have to go get water from the well." Well, she walked out to the well and she dipped a bucket of water and was pulling it up when she heard someone yelling, "Help! Please help me! Please help me!" And she looked, and Giovanni had walked down to the river. And because it was so rainy, the edge of the river gave out. And as Olive was looking, he fell into this rushing river. Well, because he was a wolf, Olive could have let him go, but she decided to help him. So she ran down to the river and ran alongside him and grabbed a long branch and held it out to him and said, "Here, grab hold." And when he had grabbed hold, she pulled him on to the bank. And he shook. I don't know how many of you know how dogs shake, but they send water spraying everywhere. He shook. And he looked at her and said, "But you're a pig, and you saved me. Please, how can I help you? What can I do? I'd like to eat you, but I can't after you saved me." And she said, "Come back to my place. We'll get you dried off and I'll feed you." He went back to her house, and when her brothers saw the wolf, they all ran into the guest bedroom and tried to dive under the bed, but the bed wasn't big enough, so they all tried to make themselves as small as possible, which was hard to do because they were big. And she said to Giovanni, sit at the table and I will give you some lasagna. And then she called to her brothers, he's not going to eat us. Come out and eat some lasagna. So they all sat around the table and ate lasagna. And Giovanni took his first bite and said, this is really good. How did you do it? And it's got meat in it. And she said, that's right. I used chicken, cow, and turkey. And he said, but how can you make it taste so good? Only pig tastes this good. And she said, no, you can use chicken, cow, and turkey. And I can teach you how. And he said, can you make sausage from those things? Or bacon, or... And she smiled and nodded and said, yes, you can. So after her brothers ate lasagna and had some tiramisu, they went into the bedroom to sleep. And Olive told Giovanni, after they had talked about his restaurant and how it was failing, and how his mother had threatened to shut it down because it was failing, she said, I'd be happy to come to your restaurant and show you and your mother how to cook such good food. He said, really, you would? And she said, oh, yes, I would. He said, okay, but thank you. May I have a piece of lasagna to take to my mother so she can taste it? And Olive said, most definitely. So she cut a piece of lasagna for him, put it in a container, and gave it to him, and he left. And she also sent him home with some tiramisu. The next day, Giovanni came back. It was a bright sunny day after all the rain they'd had, and he asked Olive to come work at the restaurant. Olive went into the restaurant, and the first thing she did was go through the entire kitchen. She tossed everything that had been pre-made because it was all bad. And she put in orders for more food, and then she started cooking, and she taught all of the chefs they had, which was 2, how to cook. And she told her brothers that if they were going to live with her for this winter, and if they were going to build houses, they'd have to earn some money because she was not going to pay for the things that they needed to make their houses, nor was she going to let them use her molds or her shovel or her spade or any of the other things she had bought. So she got them to come to work as servers, because there was only one server, and as a host. And after some grumbling, Bambino agreed to work, and Romeo agreed to work, and Antonio kind of said, oh, I've been sitting around too much. I think I will come back and work. And Olive turned that entire restaurant around and taught Giovanni and his mother and his family how to make food without using pig. And today, the restaurant is completely run by pigs and a couple of wolves. And that is how Olive saved her brothers from becoming sausage and bacon and whatever else pig becomes. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kara.
Wasn't that just wonderful? Another round of applause to Kira Larkin. And those are all stories that she creates. I don't know if you've ever noticed her deep into her note taker and creating. And there's been many stories that my daughter, for example, says, I want to hear that one again. I want to hear that one again. And so now you can also go, yes, I want to hear that one again. So here's what happens. Now we have those who are streaming and those who are going to be watching after the fact. This is the part where we can't really help you too much. You're going to have to go to your own fridge. But those who are here in person, there are light refreshments. And that way we can just mingle. You can just kind of hang and everything. It's up to you. But, it's always fun to be able to enjoy together. And then, of course, it gives you a chance to tell Kira about just what you love the most with those stories. Now with Story Crossroads, we're always doing the next thing. And so this was our 99th house concert. So guess what's next month?
100.
100. How'd you know? So what? I can't believe it though. I was at the first one. That was in December of 2015. And our first storyteller was Julie Barneson. And so we thought it'd be special that we would also have Julie Barneson be the storyteller for the 100th. And she's telling one of the stories that she told at the very first one. So if you weren't at the first one, that's okay. I love this story, so I can't wait for her to tell it. And then she's going to share some new ones too. And the theme will be Victorian ghost stories. Can I get a ooh? Yes, it's fun. Well, and also, if you don't come in person, you can stream. You just go to youtube.com/Story Crossroads, and you can then be aware of those things. You can even see some of our past house concerts. We didn't start streaming until 2023. However, now we just do. That's just what we do now to make it possible both ways. Again, you can come whether or not you donate. For donations, you can just go to storycrossroads.org/donate. There are QR codes in the back if you like, or as some of you have done, we also, cash or any of the ways that you'd like to do that. But we're really here to celebrate story. That's the most important thing. We're just glad that you're here. You got to experience it. Some of you, it's your first time, but don't let it be the last, right? So round of applause again, yay!
Tell us how to get on your email.
Oh, if you just go to storycrossroads.org, after you wait just a few seconds and poof, you can actually join our newsletter. So then you're on top of things. We actually have our big festival happening in May, and it's going to be at the Murray City Park. So it's not too far for you if you're from the Salt Lake area. It's wonderful. Plus, we're actually collaborating with 3 different libraries this year. So we're working with the Murray Library, with the Pleasant Grove Library, and the American Fork Library. So if you go to the website, you'll see a big picture of the festival. You click on that picture, it will get you to the schedule and everything. It is fun. If you go in person, it is free. We do have virtual workshops, and there is a cost to that, but it is also very affordable. So it is something that we want people to experience. So you got to taste a little bit of house concert. There's the festival where we have about 35 youth tellers plus 6 professional story artists, plus we have about 10 older adults from the community who perform. It's a grand time. So let's just have some treats. You people streaming, okay, you're in charge of going to your fridge. We're so glad you came. Thank you. And yes, thank you all. Applause to everybody. Now go mingle, mingle, mingle. And there's bookmarks and stickers for anybody with Story Crossroads.
Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome.
These flowers are from Camilla and me.
Oh,
You did a
thank you.
beautiful job. You did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Can I donate here? Can I donate cash?
Again, you have to be very calm.
Also, so you recorded it, is it gonna be available somewhere or on the website, or how do I? How will it be available?